Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in here. This is Phil with Phil's Woodwork, and today we are going to fix a cutting board. This is one of my buddy's cutting boards. It's been in his family for a while. It was actually his grandmother's, and you can see just over time, moisture has got the best of it. It probably hasn't been seasoned in a while, so it's split in half right down the middle. So all I'm doing is cleaning these two seams up, taking the sander to it, getting all the old glue off, and making some nice, good, clean, solid surfaces in order to add the glue and reclamp this together. So once the sanding is done and both these are nice and smooth and ready to glue, I just take a Type Bond 3 wood glue and get a good heavy dose on there. Take my finger, spread that around, and get a nice, good, thick layer of glue on both sides. I typically go pretty heavy on the glue, especially when I'm not using any other joining methods. And then when we clamp it up, all I'm doing is keeping pressure on that seam with these two clamps. I'm going to clamp across the main break, and then I'm going to take a third clamp here and go the opposite direction, because you can see this is not just a straight line through the board, but there's also a jagged block section to that I need to come in and pull down to make sure that third surface is nice and tight. And you can see as I start to tighten up these clamps, the glue will just start to pull out of there and ooze out of there. So the next thing I'm going to want to do once this is all clamped up and ready to sit is I just get a wet rag and clean off all the loose glue. Makes sanding and planing a little easier. So then next, once this is all done, I took it out of the clamps and I put it into my surface planer. And you can see here the second pass as I throw this through the planer, I think it's because of the end grains. As this went through right here, you can see I actually had a blowout and blew out one of the chunks. You can see right about now that chunk blows out. So, and I'll show you how we fix that later on. But really that took and gave it a good, clean, and fresh surface on both sides that we can work with. Next, I just went back to the sanding and took it at 120 and just sanded for a few minutes to make it a nice, good, clean, smooth surface. We'll do more sanding later on as well as we prep for seasoning. So you can see the chunk right there next to my fingers is where it blew out on that planer. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the bandsaw and I'm just going down the seams of that block that has a chunk missing. And I'm going down the glued seams, and then I'm going to go and make multiple passes with the bandsaw so that in a few minutes here you'll see I take the chisel and I can just snap those out nice and easy. Once I've removed all those chunks, you'll notice that I actually went a little deeper than I would have liked to have with the bandsaw, and I kind of went into the next block. And I thought maybe I could smooth that out with my chisel, but those ended up being a little deeper than what I'd like to fix with a chisel. So what I'm going to try next, and it worked out really well actually, is I'm going to take some of the sawdust I used or that I had from sanding it and mix it with a little bit of glue here and push it into each of those little grooves and make a wood putty essentially with the sawdust from this board. And that just fills in all those really minor superficial bandsaw marks that I put into that block. And once that's all dried up, you'll never even see them. And then next, I just took a chunk of oak that I had laying around. The end grains matched perfectly with this cutting board. And really at the end, when I showed my buddy this product, he couldn't tell me which piece I'd actually replaced. So at the end of the day, it really did its job, and the repair went really well. And all I'm doing here is just getting a good hefty amount of glue again on there. I'm going to get the hammer, tap that in there, and then I'm going to clamp that down and let that dry nice and strong. So I just want to take a minute here and thank you all for choosing to watch this video. I hope that you've made it this far in the video and that you're going to continue all the way to the end of the video. I hope that maybe you're learning something, or you're at least noticing some things that I could have done better. And I really hope that you leave those comments for me. Woodworking has become a passion of mine. I'm no professional woodworker. However, I am hoping to learn and grow and better my craft. And I would love to have the help from the community out there. So if you see something, please let me know. So this piece has completely dried and is rock solid in there. And now I'm just taking a saw and cutting off the excess of this block. So this is definitely not the right saw for the job. I could have used a Japanese saw or maybe some sort of a fine coping saw type of deal to cut so close to that board. This is unfortunately the only saw I had at the time. Since recording this video, though, I have purchased a couple of the Japanese saws that I really am looking forward to trying out in some future projects. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see my shot at using those saws here in other videos. So once that chunk was cut off with a saw, I just took 100 grit sandpaper after that and started smoothing out the rest of that block to try to blend in with the rest of the cutting board to the best I could. This did take some time, but I wanted to make sure that I got that to look as if it was part of that board. It turned out pretty good. So next, what I did is I mixed up some epoxy, some food grade epoxy, and I'm going through and finding all the other little cracks and crevices that are starting to open up on this board, and I'm filling them with epoxy. And the idea behind this is that that epoxy will go in there and bond and will prevent the cutting board from splitting in the future at those weak spots. Once that epoxy is cured, I just take that back to the sanding table and start sanding away at the excess epoxy to get it back down to a nice smooth surface. Once the epoxy is all gone and I've done a good check to make sure there's no other cracks that need more epoxy, it's time to then go on to the finish sanding. So all I do is I take a pencil and I draw a pencil line on there, and I start with 120 grit. And then once that pencil is gone, I then go up to 180, do another pencil line, and then go to 220, and then the board is good to be seasoned. So once we're done with the sanding, I just get a wet rag and clean off all the loose dust on the board and getting it ready to go take it to the seasoning table. So next, I don't know if you remember, but this board actually came with 4 little nub legs. They also needed to get sanded down so that it was all the same look, throughout the board. I didn't want the legs to look old and the board to look new. All I did is make a little lathe, so to speak, with my drill. Plugged them into the drill, took some sandpaper to it, and the reason I did this is to prevent any flat spots trying to sand it by hand. So this really did the job, and they came out really well. At the end, I just take a wet rag there and clean off all the loose dust from sanding. And I did that with all 4 legs. So then what I did is I went and seasoned this with some Butcher Block mineral oil, and you can see here that this block really just soaked this oil in right away. I mean, it hit it and just soaked it in like a sponge. This typically is not my preferred method of seasoning a a cutting board. However, I did not have at this time a bath big enough for this block and enough oil to soak this block entirely in the mineral oil. I do prefer the soaking method over the wiping on method like this. I just think that it really takes and gives that cutting board an opportunity to soak in as much of that oil as possible. So I literally will just let it soak in a bath of mineral oil for a couple of hours, pull it out, wipe off any of the excess, and then you're typically good to go. If you've made it this far in the video and you'd like to leave me a comment on whether you prefer the soaking method or wiping on the mineral oil method, I'd really appreciate to see what you have to say. I've heard a lot of back and forth comments out there on the woodworking forums and communities on what the better method is. So I would be curious to see what you have to say. So really all I did is I just kept applying this mineral oil until the oil would sit there for about 15-20 minutes without being soaked in, and then I would just wipe off the excess. And that's how you know when you're doing this method, that's how you know that it's been soaked in enough. And you can see there's the final result. Thanks again for watching. If you liked the video, please hit subscribe to the channel, and next video is going to be a video of me making this barrel table. This is a barrel table made out of old wine barrel staves. So once again, thanks for watching. If you like it, please hit subscribe and hit that bell, and it'll let you know when that barrel table video is ready to watch. Thanks again.